Hey guys, thanks for joining me on Tanks and Fish. Today we're going to be talking about Rotala rotendifolia. I'm sure I butchered that name, but it's more commonly known as Rotala indica. I know there's going to be a lot of people correcting me on, oh, you have to pronounce it this way. Well, it is what it is. Before we get into the video, go ahead and like and subscribe. I do want to thank all my subscribers. I noticed I'm up to 250 subscribers. Not a huge milestone, but it's a huge milestone for me, so definitely thank you guys so much. So we're going to go ahead and get some closer views, and we're going to talk a little bit more about these plants. So let's dive right in. All right, so let's talk about Rotala rotendifolia, also known as Rotala indica. Here you can see some Rotala bunches in my tanks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it looks like. One of them is actually a trimming from one of the other plants. I'll talk about propagation in a minute too. Tank size for these guys, let's start with 10 gallons minimum. They like to grow tall, so you don't want to put them in a little beddable or tiny little breeder box. You want to keep them in a decent tank where they can shine the best. And me personally, I wouldn't put them in anything under a 10 gallon. You can, but it doesn't look as great as if you would be putting them in a taller tank. Placement on these plants are going to be mid-ground to background. As I said, they like to grow tall, so putting them in the front of your tank like I have it here is going to block pretty much the view of the entire tank. So you want to go mid to background. pH limits on these, I've seen people say they can go as low as 6. Me personally, I keep them in a neon tank with pH of 6.5, and I also have kept them with cichlids at a pH of 7.5. The recommended pH I've seen is 6 to 8, so anywhere in that range. But me personally, 6.5 to 7.5 is where I've kept them. Temperatures on these plants, they are 73 to 83. They're a tropical plant, so you definitely want to keep them in a warm environment. Anything colder or anything hotter, you're definitely going to notice damage to the leaves themselves, and they're not going to grow healthy for you. Light conditions. Light conditions, you got to shoot for what you want. Medium light, they're going to grow slow for you. They're going to look still beautiful and green, but you're not going to get the best out of them. But they will grow in medium light. If you move them over to high light, you definitely got to feed them good amounts of fertilizers along with good iron to promote good colors out of them. These plants can go from green to red to purple depending on the fertilizer amount and the lighting that you put into them. So the prettier, the more colors you want, definitely give them the necessary nutrients for them to shine for you. Tall tanks, high light, good nutrients, these plants will look amazing for you. You can use CO2, but it's not needed. Medium tank, medium light, low fertilizers, no CO2 works great. This is what I have here. If you want to go for better, brighter colors, add CO2, you're going to see explosive growth along with your nutrients and your high light. You're going to see excellent looking plants. Next, let's talk about height. How tall do these plants get? I've seen forums saying that these plants can get all the way up to 30 inches long. I personally haven't seen a picture of that happen. So can they get bigger than that? Possibly. In aquarium tanks, you generally want to keep them trimmed on your tank height. All right, so I want to talk about trimming and propagation. Trimming and propagation are actually really important for this plant to keep them trimmed back, healthy, looking great in your tanks. Propagation is also important if you want to start with a small bundle and eventually grow the amount of Rotala that you actually have in your tanks. So let's take a look at these guys. All right, just getting some of my tools so I can get some hands on to show you exactly what we're looking at. So here, one of my taller stems, I should say. What you want to do is you want to look at the ones that actually need trimming. You look down and you count the nodes. The nodes are where the leaves are growing. So you want to cut down halfway down. You want to cut down towards the nodes that you feel you need to cut down to. So eye it out, find the nodes, and cut right below them. For me here, I'm trying to keep plants about this height. So now that I've trimmed it, I can do two things: throw it away, or I can propagate it. This plant propagates two different ways. The first way that it propagates is going to be, as you can see at the bottom here, it grows new plants by sprouting them from the roots. So as you can see here, this is all new growth coming from the roots. That's way one of propagation. The second way of propagating is by trimming off stems. Once you have the stem trimmed up, you get the trimming that you want to propagate. All right. So here's the trimming that I just clipped, and I want to propagate it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just tear off a couple of the leaves at the very bottom, being careful not to damage the stem. Rip the leaves from 2 or 3 nodes. Now you see that? It's trimmed at the bottom. So now I can propagate it by replanting it into the gravel. So let's go ahead and do that now. All right, so you get your stem. You find your spot where you want to start growing new plants at, and you just bury it in there. And there you go. That's pretty much your propagation. So you basically just let it grow at the roots, or you trim all your trimmings on the plant. You just rip a couple leaves at the nodes after you've trimmed the plant, and you just replant it down on the gravel. There it is. So this one back here is a clipping from one of my other ones, and I probably planted it about I want to say 2 weeks after I got it. I trimmed off one of the stems and planted it just to check out its growth. So that's about now a month and a half of growth. And I have medium lighting on this tank. Really no fertilizers, hardly. Not dosing iron yet, and medium light. So what happens after you trim these plants? Well, they are bushy plants. So when you trim off one of the stems, it's it's actually like a hydra. 2 heads grow in its place. So if you can see this plant right here, this guy right here, right there is where I trimmed it, and 2 new stems grew out of that node right there. So every time you trim this plant, chances are you're going to grow 2 stems out of it. So keep that in mind. This is a bushy plant, so when you're trimming it, you're going to be growing more and more, and it's eventually going to start looking real bushy on you. So you got to make sure you keep an eye on it, and you always maintain it. You want to try to trim it to where enough sunlight, or light, gets down to the bottom of the plant, or else the bottom of the plant is going to pretty much wither away on you and die out. So try to keep the bushiness to a minimum and propagate properly. All right, guys, thanks for joining me here. I hope I was able to teach you enough about this plant for you to go out and get your own and start decorating with it. This plant is actually really awesome to grow, really fun to watch, and like I said, it turns into a nice bushy jungle for you, if that's the look you're going for, and also depending on what you're feeding and lighting it with. If you would like to check out this plant a little bit more in depth, I'm actually going to put up a scaping video of one of my tank that I just showed you where it's at. It's going to be a new quarantine tank, so I'm going to be pulling the fish out of there the guppies that I have in there, and I'm going to be getting a new fish. So I'm going to be trimming these Rotala back, and I'm going to be planting it kind of more specific. And I'll be showing you a little bit more close-ups there. So if you really want to check out what it's going to look like in a finished tank, definitely check out that upcoming video that I'll be uploading. Well, with that said, thanks again for joining me here on Tanks and Fish. I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, remember to subscribe and like. Any comments, please leave them down below. If there's anything that I missed covering in this video, just let me know, and I'll definitely help you out with whatever questions I can answer for you. Well, with that, thanks again, and we'll see you on the next one.